Much has been written about public education and student learning outcomes. Parents are demanding more accountability and transparency. They want to have more say on what is being taught in schools. Educators protest and claim the teaching profession is under attack. Meanwhile, opponents of standardized testing argue there is little evidence that educational outcomes have improved. They claim the only thing that testing has taught us is which students are the best test takers. What is the purpose of education, and how do we honestly know if we are achieving the desired outcomes? We live in a complicated world with diverse learning styles, prior knowledge, cultural backgrounds, and cognitive development. Can anyone imagine a one-size-fits-all standardized solution? Things that appear logical to one student or family may seem totally illogical or even irrational to another. What is the correct yardstick to measure success? What would Google, Apple, or Microsoft do? In business, successful outcomes are determined by the bottom line. You are either making money, or saving time. If you are not contributing to the bottom line, you don't belong in business. If you're not solving real problems or filling unmet needs, you don't belong in business. Google, Apple, and Microsoft are all Wall Street darlings because they consistently meet or exceed market expectations. Education works to close learning gaps and to develop student characteristics of a good citizen in a democracy. Is it possible that what we have always labeled as learning gaps are only socially constructed? In this podcast, we boldly ask, what is the purpose of education? And are students learning what they need to know to not only survive, but thrive in an unpredictable, sometimes unpleasant, fragile economy? Where do we start? How do we begin to mend a broken education system that refuses to acknowledge inefficiencies and waning efficacy? Are people more concerned about job security than professional integrity? Working together, students, parents, and educators must determine priorities which will most likely accomplish the mission of education. As for me, I believe that competency-based education, or CBE, is the answer. CBE can close the learning gaps and significantly improve educational flexibility and efficiency. Allow me to illustrate my point with one simple example. The Utah State Board of Education mandates semester-long classes for digital and financial literacy. Both are graduation requirements. Sounds reasonable, but is it really? Can we unequivocally say that the current model for education is the most effective and efficient allocation of students' seat time? The economic law of scarcity teaches us that everything has a trade-off, and all the opportunities forfeited have a real cost. Economist Milton Friedman explained it this way: there is no such thing as a free lunch. Yes, wasting time ought to be a serious crime. Time is our most valuable asset and too often mismanaged. CBE is a reallocation and reprioritization of time and educational resources, driven by cultural fit and a self-directed learning framework. Digital and financial studies may be important, but 20 weeks of seat time in each class is excessive and unnecessary. Students who are predisposed to the professions of building, fixing, serving, and saving, or perhaps performing, will discover hands-on active learning in a workshop format as an undeniable comparative advantage. And for this learning community, learning becomes much more meaningful and relevant. Do we really understand how to fix education? We can't fix problems that we don't recognize or achieve outcomes that have not been defined. When there is an added focus on the bottom line, we all learn to stop wasting time. Dr. Stephen R. Covey, in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, taught us to begin with the end in mind and to focus on what matters most. These are important time management principles. May I suggest that the indicator of success is the efficacy of education for the rising generation as measured by a declining prison population in a free and prosperous nation. More equality, less unemployment, increasing gross domestic product per capita. Students are more likely to learn and honestly care if and when they believe in the purpose of public education. Learning, by definition, is the acquisition and application of knowledge. Learning absolutely requires student engagement and effort. If the process and the purpose of education does not change, students will continue to disengage and educational outcomes will stay the same. If my comparison to Wall Street sends ice up your veins, consider the Nordic economies and the education system in Finland. UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Science, and Cultural Organization, rates Finland's education system as the best in the world. Finland's educators are highly regarded, respected, and compensated. The profession is highly selective. School hours and days are shorter. Finland emphasizes flexibility within secondary, general, and vocational education and equality for all. Now is the time for all great nations to reimagine education with an unquestionable and intentional focus to elevate educational, political, social, and economic outcomes with these on-ramps as our guide. Optimal outcomes, non-discriminatory, equitable and flexible, reality-based, applied learning, market-determined, purpose-driven, self-directed, autonomous education. Thank you for listening to the 7-Minute Sensei. Please subscribe to our weekly podcast. The 7-Minute Sensei is the place and the digital safe space where we analyze and optimize the education experience for the rising generation. This is Sensei Lue, wishing you peace and prosperity, more insight and clarity.